French music. It makes me feel like I'm in a bistro somewhere, not that Sebastopol is an incredible place to be. Well, thanks for sticking around for the dinner time workshop here. We're really happy that you're here. And this is really, when they asked me to do something, I thought what we would do is talk a little bit about community and about luthiers in our community, because that's always been something that I've done a lot of. And I've been in Sonoma for, I think, about close to 22 years now. It was in the Bay Area before that, and came from Brooklyn as a guitar maker as a young guy, moved out to California, and never left. Was out here for a band, and I've always spent most of my career fighting either being a player or being a musician, but I'm really a maker, but I'm really both. Now I am much more of a maker, just because there aren't that many gigs, frankly, and because it really is my number one calling on the planet. But if I haven't introduced myself, I'm Tom Rebecki, and a lot of what Bruce Sexauer said, I was resonating with in the audience, because as makers, this is our world, and Bruce and I both know that when we go to conventions or gatherings, we're often addressing groups of other makers, not so much groups of people who are disparately interested in all aspects of music. So we talk a lot about technical things and how to glue things together. We talk about how we make this joint or that joint, or how we put our binding in or purfling in, or any of those things, or how we get a certain sound. And at this point in my career, it's been 40 years for me. I started in 1972, actually 41 years. And I thought, since I've had this role and joy in my life, one of the great joys of my social aspect of guitar making for me is that I've been blessed by having a lot of other makers that I've worked with. I've always had a deep interest in education. I've always wanted to suck other people into this crazy business, and because for me, as a maker, and I've been very blessed and very, very lucky as a maker to be where I'm at now, and I see some very brilliant makers in the audience creeping down the hallway here, but the interesting thing about this for me is perspectives on for many of us, and I'm going to introduce everybody here. I'll run down. That's Robert Lee on the end. Robert has been making instruments. I first met Robert in, I think we were talking about 1979 or 80 in San Francisco. 1980, yeah. He worked for Stars Guitars. And has been a fixture in here for many, many years. We've been on the same path. Michael Gutsch next to him, who is the guitar maker who really runs my production company, RGC. He's the head guitar maker over there. He's not the administrator, thank God, but he's the guy who really is a brilliant hand maker with his jigs and fixtures and his brilliant point of view. We have Frankie D'Souza next to him, who's worked with me for almost 8 years now, I'm guessing, something like that. Frankie is the soul of, in some ways he represents the soul of the production company. We have a private practice, which is in my barn, and we have a production company to make these patented halfling guitars. However, we function as one big lutherie family, and we all drink from the same basic mead, which is all we want to do is make guitars. So how will we figure out how to do that and get away with it? I've been feeling like I've been getting away with this my whole life. And then we have Timmy Levold next to him. Frankie and Timmy are both working together at RGC, and they both worked in the private shop as well. They're both experts at what they do, and they have been finishing instruments mostly lately. They've been running our finishing department together. They're a tag team, and they're both very, very good. I'm the old guy. This is MAEGEN Wells, and MAEGEN has been with me for, I guess, almost 4 years, 3.5 years or something. She is from Michigan originally, but from, not Michigan originally, yes, Michigan originally, went to school at the Gallup School, took that route to be educated as a guitar maker, and I met MAEGEN in another part of the country. At all the guitar shows, she would show up looking for a place to go to, and was so impressed with her love of instrument making, her pure, unadulterated passion for this, which is really what it takes to hang in for 40 years. It was really why I thought she'd do really well with us. And Stuart Day on the end is really the foreman of my private shop, who worked for many years with Brian Gallup as well. He was a teacher at the Gallup School. Coincidentally, he was also one of MAEGEN's teachers and co-conspirators at Gallup, and They wound up together at my shop, not because we planned it that way, but I would have to say we've had a wonderful period of time, last 4 or 5 years. Stuart's been here for 5, and you know, as Stuart gets ready to think about his future and departing for his private practice, which he'll be doing soon, Megan, who's been there, who's already thinking about that. I'm already hip deep in it. Timmy, Frankie, Mike, and Robert. I thought it's very unique that we're all professional makers in this area, and these are professional makers. These guys derive their living from making guitars, as foolish as that is. But everybody's got a really different career perspective on things, and I thought to myself, if I put myself back in 1972 in my college dorm, making my first crappy guitar and thinking, you know, I could make a better guitar than I could buy, which is why I started. I had no idea that 40 years later I'd be sitting here as a maker in Sonoma County, surrounded by this family of makers. And the greatest joy for me has been the community of makers. You know, I think I can make a pretty good guitar. I've been doing it a long time. I've been lucky enough to have some things in my career that have been really exciting. I've gotten way more attention than I deserve. But the reality of it is, my day-to-day joy is sharing this, and so I've been a guy who, when I found out that there were others like me doing this in my mid-30s, I instantly went out and began to plug myself into that community because it made me so much of a better maker. I discovered that there were people out there that were 10 times better than me, and there still are, but I saw these people. I'd go see their work, and it would fire my imagination, and that's when I understood what community was all about. And so when this show popped up here, you know, this possibility when Kevin contacted me about the show, I thought, this is about community. I also was one of the 3 founders of the Healdsburg Guitar Festival, which is one of our big major events that occur in Sonoma County, and that show is a very large for sale show that's now developed into one of the largest shows in the country. It's a huge event. This has the folksy, wonderful feel of a new event getting off the ground in the community. And so my interest is in education. It's in building the instruments that I build. It's in getting people started on the road to Lutherie, which has been a tremendous life for me. And like I say, I've been very lucky, and particularly with events of late. But I thought that it would be very interesting to just talk about this. And then if there's anybody out here who's interested in either getting started in Lutherie, who is always wanted to do this, who has any interest in a professional career in Lutherie, there are paths to which to take. And I think that the reality of this is a very deep business. You know, you don't do this. You don't do this halfway if you really want to make a living at it. You commit yourself to it. And there's a huge difference between having a job and committing yourself to something. So for me, you're either all in or you're all out. And so when the successful people who really make a living at this, and who not just make a living, but because the most important thing is to make great instruments and to leave them on the planet, so long after you're pushing up roses or daisies or whatever you're pushing up, there is still beauty being created in your world. This is really why I do this. I do this because it's what I do best. I'm a musician, but my greatest gift is this. I've always had both in my life. But when I really look at the reality of 200 or 300 years from now, that some of the instruments that I leave on the planet, I'm on about 600 something now, of those instruments that I actually numbered. The first 40 I would rather buy back and burn because I had no idea what I was doing. At this point, I think about what that means to me. My life is, I've got 10 years ahead of me probably in my career, maybe 15. And what fascinates me now is at the crossroads that we're at in terms of culture, society, the last 4 years of our economy, which have been very, very difficult for most guitar makers who are artists, and the future, and also what's happened with the government regulations on wood importation, for which I went to Congress and testified in a very unsatisfying way. You know, I have to look at the future and think about, you know, where we're all going from here, what people think about this business, and you know, why are they in it? Why did they get in it? What do they see ahead of them? So, you know, Robert, 40 years, and you know, what keeps you doing this?
What keeps me doing this? Boy, I wish I had a real answer for that one. It's kind of like when you have that sweetheart that you've been with and you break up with them, and then like 10 years later, all of a sudden you see them on the street and you go, would you like to go out for coffee? Why? But no, to me, why do I keep coming back to it? I guess because I like wood so much, because I love seeing it come together. And there's always the the book, I think it was called The Singing Tree, where this gentleman had cut this whole tree down and turned it into this beautiful cello. Well, that's kind of what I see with the wood that I get, is that all of a sudden it's no longer a block of wood, it's this beautiful instrument. And then I get even more enjoyment of just, I don't know, seeing people play it. No matter whether it's painted bright red like the Paul Revere bass I'm doing, or some fancy wood that I've done for some other person, it's like, wow, here's the block of wood turning into a useful item. And my first bass was actually in junior high school at James B. Davidson in San Rafael, and I do have a picture of myself with a violin-shaped bass, so I could have a bass like Paul McCartney had, kind of. Well, kind of. 2x4 neck and a mahogany body, but it played.
More than one string?
Yeah, more than one string.
That's good.
And it worked, kind of, sort of, kind of.
And you actually teach people? You have you do a school
yes,
or something?
Yes, actually, I've always been into being an instructor. I taught up at Scout. I actually taught up at Camp Royane up there in Cazadero. I taught wood carving and leather work and Indian lore and all that, which became the most popular thing up there. Then after that, when I started doing guitar building, I started doing instructional videos on marquetry and other materials, and working with another company doing engraving. And so I've always been into the instructional part, and then I started up a school. And even though, yes, there's a lot of technical stuff, I just wanted people to enjoy themselves and have a good time. So I started up my little rock and roll guitar building school. And yeah, everybody has a good time. They get a lunch there, and they get to build a guitar, and they don't feel like there's some teacher with a, with a stick that's going to hit them on the head if they do something wrong. Although one young man did learn when I said, don't sand it this way because you'll make a mistake. And he learned. If I tell you don't do it, it's not because I want you to do it my way, it's because you'll ruin it. But I'm pretty good with my students, and I taught 8 years at a college doing a 3D and stop motion animation. That was kind of a different one, but why? Because I love just teaching people how to do this stuff. It's always been my philosophy. When I needed a leather belt in college, I went and learned leather work and turned that into a business. When I wanted a silver bracelet, I learned jewelry making and turned that into a business. And the same thing with the guitar thing. It's like, I want people that have that same feeling, like, I want to learn. Okay, good. Come over, I'll show you. Yeah, that's been my whole thing.
Mike, how about you? Can you tell people a little bit about your history, how you wind up at RGC, and why you do it every day?
Yeah,
because that's a damn good question. We don't pay you.
I know. First, I want to take a small survey here. I think everybody here is, well, most people are guitar makers here. Whose first attempt at guitar making failed, did not play?
The guitar makers.
Hey, you know what? That's less than I thought. Less than I hoped, anyway. So yeah, my name is Mike Gutch, and I'm the son of a woodshop teacher. So I got started woodworking pretty young, and sister played guitar, so those two things converged. And like Rob and probably almost everyone here, I like to make stuff rather than buy it. So anyway, yeah, ultimately, but hopefully, it'll work out. So yeah, I dabbled with some guitars in the late 70s, started making pointy guitars for my metalhead buddies. Eventually, Alembic hired me on, Alembic Incorporated. They make electric instruments. But it wasn't until I hooked up with Tom about 6 or 7 years ago that I kind of realized, I guess this is going to be my career. Because in my early 20s, I tried lots of different things, cooking, just what have you, carpet cleaning, just anything, and nothing really stuck. And anyway, all these years, I more or less, more on and off, have been making guitars in some way, shape, or form, and it definitely feels like, yeah, I guess I'm stuck with it. So just kind of doing it, and so that's my deal.
Frankie, how about you? Frankie's nervous, so we'll just try to honor that.
But he does have beautiful hair.
Everybody here is a musician
Thank
as
you.
well. I think that's also part of the deal. But yeah, so how did you get stuck with us? How did that happen?
I used to be a musician, and actually in my first... Sorry. I used to be a musician, and I've just grown up with the love and passion of music. I used to, still to this day, rock in my room and playing air guitar. So, rocker, lover of music at heart, and I played one of my first serious shows right here on this stage. But then when it got as bigger than I could even imagine in touring and that kind of stuff, that's not what I wanted to do in music. And I'm also a huge believer in communication, and music to me is the biggest and first form of communication. So to me, it's like I'm able to talk any language with anybody by a strum or a beat or a sound. So for my passion, for me, it's that keeps growing. I could have gone woodworking into anything else, but with music and woodworking, it collided, and I haven't been able to stop. That's what drives me.
You know, I always think that it's one of the highest forms of physics meets alchemy, making guitars. I remember teaching somebody once and listening to them, overhearing them tell their friend, I figured out how we're going to do it. I know how we're going to make these instruments. They're going to be really great. But, you know, when the day comes when alchemy is not a part of this process, when somebody doesn't want to have an instrument that I made because it sounds like something that I would make, or make a Harry Fleischman instrument or a Bruce Sexauer instrument, or anybody's instrument that doesn't sound like, that sounds like them, not me, to me, that's when I'll quit doing this, because that's when the magic will go out of it. So for me, I have to have the magic in this to continue it. Has to be unobtainium. Every instrument has to be better than the one before it. I've never made an instrument to make me happy, and that's what drives me. Timmy has came to us, I guess, about the same time as Frankie, and has been a part of what we've done for 8 years now, I guess. And Timmy does a lot of things. He's a very good finisher. He's a great setup guy. He's been building these, heading up the project to build a breast cancer guitar, which they donate every year for that. Why do you do this? Why the hell do you do this?
I became a Lutherer because I knew I could never make it as a musician. And maybe that's for the same reason a lot of us became one. But also, all these guys are all local, actually. I grew up with Frankie, and Tom actually lives just around the corner from me. And I grew up in a family of construction workers, and fell into these guys' hands and started building just so I could contribute to what we're all pretty much here for, which is music. You know, you spend a lot of your time around power tools and everything like that, but the prime moment is when you get it into a player's hands or somebody strings up a guitar for the first time. I built a lot of things in my life, but anything so far with strings on it seems to have gotten me on a more deeper level.
How about you, Megan?
I don't know. It's all kind of a blur. But there's never really been another...
Have another beer. Just kidding.
How many years have you been doing this now?
Well, I discovered Luthery when I was just about to turn 18. And ever since then, there's never been a choice. There was no other option. This is just what I'm supposed to do. So, you know, people will ask me how I ended up working for Tom. And, you know, it's just as cheesy as it might sound sometimes. You know, you don't give up. I got knocked off my horse a few times because it's not easy. And you kind of have to find your place. And my place has been with Tom, and I'm a lucky girl to be able to have found that, because that's not where I started. But like I said, you know, I just never felt like there was any real option. This is just what I'm supposed to do. And if you just stay focused and gain confidence along the way, you start to develop the skills intuitionally, you know, by the people you surround yourself with. And this community really is very special in that sense, because, you know, I'm taking business classes right now at the JC because I'm trying to strengthen my weaknesses, and I'm learning just how special this industry is, because other guitar makers want to see you succeed. We all have the same goal, which is to put guitars on the planet, as Tom is always saying. You know, we just want, this is what we do, this is how we give back to the world and guitars, because we would not be here without them. And that's just kind of the way I've always thought, and not everybody always agrees with that, and not everybody always gets there the same way, but that's pretty much how I've gotten here. So, what's up?
I was just going to say, personally, I think there are more than enough guitars on the planet.
Yeah, like I said, not everybody thinks
I don't even know what we're all doing anymore.
If you ask Bob Taylor that same question, Bob Taylor, who's built more guitars than there are, you know, people in the PG&E work world, you'd say to him, so Bob, where do all these guitars go? And Bob would look at you kind of funny. He'd say, you know, where do 40,000 guitars go? And he'd say, or however many hundreds of thousands of guitars he's made, and he'll say, well, for every person, there's a guitar somebody's going to love that guitar, whatever it is. You know, it's kind of an interesting point of view. How about as a woman? How have you felt? You've entered this career as a male-dominated business, you know, and you've entered it as a very rare individual. And has that been a different path for you?
Yeah, you know, absolutely. I think what's been really the biggest lesson from all of that is it helps when I do find other females out there who are doing this, because they are out there, and when I meet them and we connect, it helps us kind of figure out exactly what we want to do individually. You know, we each have something different to bring to the table, and you know, I didn't realize it until I started meeting other female luthiers how important that really is for me personally. It helps me grow in a lot of ways, because there are a lot of dudes out there, and it is nice to have a few other ladies around from time to time. But we're out there, and if you're there, find me.
So Stuart, how about your cerebral? Stuart, I work with Stuart a lot on a daily basis, and he's a very deep guy. He doesn't, we post on Facebook, I'm afraid to read it, but he thinks a lot, and he's got a very unique perspective on things, and he's about to take off for his own career. I'll be leaving, I guess, at the end of the spring, which is really a successful thing to do. If you come through my shop as a private luthier and you're there for 14 or 15 years, something's really gone wrong. You know, and it's like having a kid who won't move out of the house. It's a bad thing. At a certain point, when you feel it's your time, it really is time to get, you know, so what'll happen is that you'll develop a strong desire to kill me, since I'm sort of the guy whose shop it is. And that's just the way it works. You know, it's like having a kid who grows antlers at the age of 13. There comes a time when it is the right time. So, you know, for that, your perspective would be really interesting, because you can talk a little about that and whatever you want to talk.
Well, I have a background in fine arts. That's what I studied in college, and I dabbled in painting and sculpting, and was really into philosophy, and I was always bouncing back and forth, and I couldn't really find a focus, because everything seemed, I didn't know it at the time, but once I found instrument making, in retrospect, everything seemed one and two-dimensional in comparison. Luthery is a very dynamic thing to do with your life. It encompasses a lot of different skill sets, and you know, painting in comparison is very two-dimensional. Not to take anything away from painting, but once I found Luthery, I just realized that this was it. You know, I went to the Gallup School of Luthery, and in my first month there, I knew that this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, because it's just continuously challenging. It's very dynamic. It's always interesting. It never gets easy, I would say, because once you master one part, there's always a million other things that you're just terrible at. And on top of that, as I've kind of been in the industry for a little bit now, I've realized that it's just full of great people. I have been very blessed with the relationships I've been able to have, and as Megan said, you know, people are just always willing to help and share, and I think that that's kind of rare in this day and age, especially in a highly competitive industry, which this is. It's a very competitive industry, and it's getting more competitive, and yet people are still willing to help and tell you everything they know, you know. I think going out on my own is a scary thing, but I'm pretty excited for it. I think I'm coming in at an interesting time in the business historically. I think that for a long time, it was this cottage industry. It was kind of an old world craft, still is, but I think that these days more and more people are coming in. You have more automation. It's causing more competition, and it's becoming more of a modern industry, I think, in a lot of ways. And that is that's great, because it really creates a lot of creativity. There's a lot of great ideas coming out of there. Competition makes you want to be better, and you know, I'm pretty excited for the next chapter of my career. Although I am going to be sad to leave Tom's shop in Northern California, but you know, it's pretty exciting.
Have to, you know, get a lot of pay a lot of to keep yourself warm in Pittsburgh with that.
Yeah.
We'll be thinking about you while we're basking in the sun. But well, you know, it's interesting to me because with every new individual that comes into my scene, this is really what keeps me vital. If I were completely on my own as a maker, I think, and I've done that, of course, at different times in my life. I've been in San Francisco, I've been here, I've been all over the place. I was teaching before I even knew how to make an instrument. You know, I was an idiot, and I did everything way before I should have done it, like many of us did in my generation. So I didn't experience that opportunity for education. When I started, there was there were 3 other guitar makers in the world that I knew. There was 2 books or 3 books on the subject, and now there's hundreds, and all of us have fed this great database, much like the modern world has developed with players whose repertoires have increased. The internet has changed the game for everybody. People come to you loaded with information, and so, you know, how you succeed and how you do this can be really a quandary. I had a very good friend of mine who gave me a book when I was a little bit down a few years ago. I had reached that point as an artist where every instrument has to be better than the one before it. Every instrument has to be better than the one before it. You know, we're not manufacturers. Even in what we call our production company, we are artisans who build instruments. That the one thing that everybody who works in my organizations understands is that mojo has to get into these instruments to make them special. It isn't about manufacturing. We're makers, and there's a difference. You know, we're not Martin, where people think we're a production shop. We've got 3 people working in it, and a manager and me occasionally. But every instrument is ground out. We know every instrument we've made. Every one of those instruments, you can call the person who it is, pretty much. You know who it was. You remember when you had your hand inside it. And I really believe that that's what makes instruments great. So to create that kind of environment, you know, I can't do that without the input of all these other energies that come into my life. So I realized if I had nobody working with me, and I don't think them working for me, they work with me, you know, I'd be hanging around and having coffee till 3, and then I might go to work for an hour, and then I might go take a walk. You know, the reality is that I have to have this kind of energy to keep me charged. As a result of that, you know, people often ask me, why do I involve myself with so many other makers? I'm a social beast, but I also realized when I plugged into that world 30 years ago of other makers, how little I know. And it was when I was in one of my educational jaunts in a furniture shop. After I'd become a guitar maker, I walked into a furniture shop because I needed money. I thought I was a genius, and they hired me on the spot, and then they realized I couldn't cut a thing on a table saw. They spent 2 years paying for that mistake, and they taught me about woodworking. I became a real woodworker then. But the most important thing anybody ever said to me was, it's not what's important, it's what's not important. And, you know, that lesson, you know, so I don't spend 12 hours working on things that are not important. I try to focus my energy on the things that will cause some difference. Of all the most important things, I think Michael Kasha said to me once, an instrument has to be 20% different for the general public to notice it. And so I identified a passion in myself for pursuing new things without being obnoxious, but to push the creative rock down the road. And I think this is why 2 or 3 years ago when I was kind of in that funk and my bibliotherapist friend gave me this book on Stradivarius, it was enormous for me because first I got depressed and I thought I'm a fool, and then I read that book, and the next month or so I felt like, well, maybe I have a place in this Lutheran cosmos, and I came to see myself eventually, and this is what he wanted me to do, as one of many, 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 many cells, all of us pushing this Lutheran rock, this creation. Music is the place, and instruments are the place where the aesthetic meets the physical. There's almost no other place where intuitional physicists train themselves for their lifetimes so that they can have mathematics meet the aesthetic and move people viscerally. And that, to me, is the crux of where the rubber meets the road with all of humanity. Is music, to me, is the central focus of it all. So to make tools for that is, for me, that's what motivates me to do this. And to surround myself with other people who want to do it keeps me fired up and keeps me honest, keeps me dishonest, keeps me learning, you know, on a constant basis. And so that desire to innovate has always been a big passion with me. I'm reminded of one quick story I'm going to tell about my father, who saw my father built ship models. He was a paint chemist where I grew up in a hard-scrapple neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it was the kind of neighborhood where in high school, some kid got shot right across the street from us. You know, I had my hand in a kid's bullet wound when I was, I think, 14 or 15. You know, I grew up in a pretty bad place, and that consciousness was not like what it is here. When I came to California and I saw this chance to create and maybe make these instruments that would have this effect, I thought, some portion of what I do for the rest of my life will be devoted to educating and drawing people into this. Is there anybody here who really wants to study Lutheran, who needs to study Lutheran, or wants to be a professional maker? Anybody out here who has any desire to do that? Hobby makers? Yeah. All the real makers are raising their hands because we all want to be hobbyists because it can be brutal business sometimes. You know, to me, that's the most fascinating thing. And when you draw more people into this, I'll finish that story about my father. He looked at came out in his business suit. It was 1978 or something. I was living in an apartment with a girl. I had, you know, the place was a pot den. You know, it was great. We were having fun. My father came over and he looked at it all. He looked at my first guitar shop and he said, "Sir, you're a mechanic." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And he said, "I'm not going to tell you what I mean by that." He said, "Sir, you're a mechanic." And it stuck with me my whole life. And the other thing he said to me, I said to him, "So why didn't you build these instruments, these boat models that he built with the popsicle sticks that we grew up with?" He left a collection of 12 or 13 incredible boat models that were spectacular. I've never seen anything as good as these boat models.
I've seen them, they're good.
They're incredible. And he never taught me a thing. He didn't want me to be a mechanic, but he quietly built these ships. So when I decided I was going to do this, I just did it. I went to the library, I taught myself to do it, because I thought that's what you did when you wanted to fabricate something. And a year on the road left me feeling like I didn't want to spend the rest of my life on the road with a bunch of musicians who were having, you know, all kinds of issues with each other, and this is what I chose to do. But, you know, I think that the lesson for me in all of this was that I said, "Why didn't you build these ship models for a living?" Because the Smithsonian wanted them. And he said, "It's because I never wanted to not love what I do for a living." He said, "And I hope you realize what that means. Like, you know, you went to a Catholic high school, you should know what amateur means. It means to love what you do." So the skill set that I've developed for survival over 40 years of this, through the ups and downs and the tough and the good parts of it, are I love this business even when I hate this business. And that's part of the discipline of it. You know, I go out to my shop. There are days I don't want to go near a tool. My hands hurt because I've spent 40 years doing this, whatever. There are days I just don't want to deal with it, you know. But what I've learned to do is to have the one discipline. I have only one discipline, literally, and that's to love it even when I hate it. And so what I try to do is to infuse that spirit in people who work with me and around me. And I think that's a really important aspect of it. And we train ourselves as, you know, Bruce was talking about paradigms and about whether or not he was right about what he was thinking, you know, and it's my job, and one of the things I really like to do is set people on a path to build instruments with some logical course so that whatever they do has some rational way. If I have a guitar that sounds like this and I want to get a guitar that sounds like this, how do I do it? Well, then you take a logical set of steps based on a belief system, which I don't even think matters if it's right or wrong. You know, frankly, because Copernicus didn't have to know the world wasn't flat to, you know, to have a great theory and for Columbus to sail, find everything he did find. So that is all part of the paradigm of why I approach it. You know, I think that where Lutheran goes from here is an interesting problem. We we've had 4 years of very bad economy. We've had something called the Lacey Act passed as a Farm Bill Act by our wonderful Congress, which really impedes, in an effort to protect lumber interests in Oregon and around the country. This legislation has been passed in really kind of an unfair way, and it's made guitar makers a target for, they view us as folks who are wasting materials and using precious materials. We use less than 1% of all the materials cut in the world for this. Most of it goes into plywood and gets sent back to us in the form of plywood furniture from Home Depot. And they have an exemption. That's 60% of the world's hardwood lumber goes into furniture from Home Depot and those kinds of things. 35% of it goes into pulp mills, and 4 other percent goes into things like knob shifters and pens, and we have less than 0.1% actually that winds up as instrument wood. So I became very actively involved with the struggle for this, went to Congress, testified in front of it, saw how that system was failing. And it made me very aware that now the economy is slowly getting better. I have a lot of friends who have really had a tough time in the last 4 years, who I've spent 40 years with in this career. The reason why I want to build community in my Lutheran community is because what got me through this was, the 40 years, is that my biggest competitors, Linda Manzer, John Monteleone, these guys who are incredible craftsmen, Steve Grimes, I can run their names off, they're my best friends in the industry. And to me, that's what makes our industry unique. So what I'm about now is trying to make sure that people coming into this industry have a sense of developing that kind of career trajectory. Those relationships, which are so difficult to develop now with the internet, and after 4 or 5 years of guitar makers feel and artists feel collectively like our government and our economy has tried to destroy us. At this point, when I see an event like this occurring about music in Sebastopol, it gets me very, very, very excited, because whether you're playing music or you're making guitars, we're all part of that same community. We only make these guitars. Somebody who works in my company was really upset because there was a magazine article on me, and it was telling everybody what a great guitar maker I was. And it forgot to mention that this fellow who had helped me build this company, he was an officer in the company, they chose to edit that out of there. And I said to him, he was upset with me, and I said to him, when I hand an instrument to an artist and that artist goes on stage, I just disappear. That's what this is about. It's not about... And when people are telling me I'm some sort of great maker, that's one thing that they want to do great. But we really all serve music. That's what we do this for. We don't serve it because we want to be rich and famous, because it's like Irvin Samaji says, a great maker, he says, we're very, very well known, a very, 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 very small number of people who really don't matter much. In that sense, we do it to serve music, and that's really why we do this. So I'm very, very excited about this. I wanted to come and talk about... we're doing a series of invitational lectures at my place in Healdsburg. We're kicking off something which is a new research and design center up there. I'm going to enlist the help of my community of makers, people like Harry who've done this before, other people, Luthiers, Mercantile, people who have experience with this. So if there's anything you want to learn, please feel free to contact me. If you have suggestions about this, contact us, let us know about this. I want to create a Center for Guitar Consciousness in Healdsburg, and that's what we're going to be doing over the next few years. When you look at your career now, you guys, as you're going ahead, what do you see in the future? We had a great run. What do you see in the next 10 or 20 years?
I'm not really sure. Let me think about that for a second. I think there's a lot of innovation coming out. I think people are pushing instruments. We specialize in art shop guitars, and I think art shop guitars are very exciting right now because historically they've really only had 2 major phases of growth, whereas the flat tops had many. And so art shop guitars, I think, have a lot of ceiling room for growth and innovation. I think they will. I think there's a lot more we can do with the art shop guitar. So that's sort of, for me personally, my career. That's where I'm going to put a lot of focus, is to developing the art shop guitar and showing people that you can do more with it than just play jazz and swing. Because I really believe I've played a few art shop guitars that have tonal qualities that many people don't think you can get out of an art shop guitar. So I know it's possible, and that's kind of my personal future in the industry. I'm hoping. We've
just been given the cut sign because it's 7 o'clock. So I guess what I'll ask is to And thank you all for sitting here. Did you anybody have any last thoughts they want to chime in with? Short last thoughts, because we've run our hour.
Oh, I guess probably my feeling is that I'm hoping that when they have a tombstone for me, that they'll say, he did it up to the end, because that's the way I feel about it, all the way to the end.
Yeah, baby. How about you, Mike?
Nah.
You got any observations, Frankie? Nothing? You must have something.
Thanks for coming.
Follow your dreams.
Yeah, you know, my last message to everybody is if you have any desire to do this, the most important single thing is to develop the passion for it, you know, and what you see up here is a bunch of very passionate
That's all we
people.
got.
Thanks a whole lot, and thanks for coming out to the incredible festival.